Welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington. This Saturday on February 25th, UCSC's Practical Activism Conference is being offered to students and the community at large. With dynamic workshops and dynamite keynote speakers, the conference challenges attendees to think of activism as a practice that incorporates action and deep reflection. What gives the Practical Activism Conference special significance is that it is designed and presented to the community by student planners from the John R. Lewis College and College 9 with the intent to provide information, action tools, and opportunities to generate local and global change. Celebrating 20 years now, I invited part of this year's planning team into the studio to reflect on the conference's history and to share their vision for this year's presentations. My guests are Nicole, Britton, Student Program Coordinator at the Office of Academic and Co-curricular Programs and a Practical Activism Conference mentor, Airielle Silva, Student Program Coordinator, also at the Office of Academic and Co-curricular Programs and a Practical Activism Conference lead. Joining Nicole and Airielle is Mark Gardner, the director of the Office of Academic and Co-curricular Programs. And I am just so thrilled to have you all in the studio with me. Welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Hi. This is going to be great. This is a very cool conference. I had not heard of it before until this year, and I bet a lot of our listeners are going to be thrilled to learn about it as well. So this is your 20th anniversary of this conference. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Nicole and Airielle, since this day-long event is created and presented by student coordinators like yourselves, I'd like to start with you. I'm going to ask you both the same question. What is it about the Practical Activism Conference that seized your interest and inspired you to get involved in creating it? And Nicole, I'm going to start with you because you're a mentor this year, which means you have previous experience planning and presenting this conference, right?
Yes, I do.
All right. So tell us about what excites you about this conference.
So this is actually my third year planning the conference and my fourth year kind of attending it, I guess, if planning it counts. But I have to say, after going to the Practical Activism Conference my first year, I was hooked into the program because I was like, this is super great. I can't believe that like our school actually has this day-long conference where like we're teaching you to get out into the community. We're teaching you about like different issues that are happening around our community as well as just the American community in general, which is a really great thing. And so from there, I just got involved. My second year.
Yeah. All right. And Airielle, how about you?
Well, for me, this is my second year. I'm a second-year student at UC Santa Cruz. And before I even accepted going to UC Santa Cruz, I attended PAC that was held online. I believe it was the 18th year of PAC when Angela Davis was invited to speak virtually. And I remember I was sitting with my aunt in the kitchen and we were geeking out that we were on the same Zoom call with Angela Davis. We could not believe it. And I also, like Nicole, was hooked from there. And I've been a student community organizer for a while now, and I knew that's something I wanted to get involved in, especially getting the roots of making activism like practical and making it accessible. And so I knew when I was coming on my first year, which was last year, I immediately wanted to get on working on PAC, and I enrolled in the class right away. And it was just exciting. And last year we did like all hybrid, and like this year's been in person. So I've experienced both a different type of planning styles, and so it's been really invigorating.
Yeah, one of the neat things about the virtual conference is that people can go back and watch it in archive. And you just mentioned Angela Davis, and I have a short clip from her opening keynote remarks from the year that you attended. All right, let's just bring Angela's voice into the studio.
From where I stand, I see activism as a practice. A practice involves not only doing what it is you set out to do, but deeply reflecting on it, engaging a whole range of ideas and issues surrounding the practice. I mean, I see freedom itself as a practice. And ultimately, I think those of you who've been involved in the Practical Activism Conference want to help to expand the presence of freedom in the world. And freedom itself is a practice that is brought about through activism. I'm remembering something that Toni Morrison said when she pointed out that the very function of freedom is to free someone else. Freedom cannot exist unless it is a collective process, a collective practice. And that is how I would begin to talk about the concept of practical activism.
So that was just a great clip from Angela talking about freedom as a process and a practice. So I want to pivot to you, Mark. You're the director of the Department of Co-curricular Activities, and you get to be a part of working with these students to create this conference. I just want to invite you to share with us what inspires you about this conference.
Other than those words by Angela Davis.
Right. Who can top that?
Right. I think what inspired me to get involved, because I got involved with attending practical activism before I became the director of the center. And so I think it's those two words together that got me originally when I thought, practical activism, because I didn't necessarily come from an activism family or a background necessarily. And so I had always pictured activism as like, you show up in the streets and you have your signs and you bang your drums and you do all that kind of stuff. But I never thought of the idea of like the practice of activism, right? That it takes a practice and a discipline, and a lot of work behind the scenes that no one sees, but that's a part of the discipline of social justice work. And so like, I was like, all right, like, yeah, let's get into that. Because I'm a very, very much a process person, right? I'm not all about like the product and like showing people things. I'm more so about like the process. And so practical activism for me, also is a place where it's about the process. Right. Yes, we produce things. We produce the conference, right, and that's a product. But then it's also about getting into the process of social justice work, and the messy process, the fun process, the joyful process. And so that's what drew me to attend practical activism, and then to apply, then to become the director of the center that hosts practical activism.
Sweet. And this is such a powerful concept, activism as a practice. I mean, who would ever think like, I'm going to meditate a couple of times and I'm done, right? Like I'm going to go to a protest and now I'm done. When the truth is that creating social change is an engaged process, right? So I want to pivot back to you, Airielle. When you think of practical activism, how do you define it? What does it mean to you? Do you have anything to add?
I think to live by Angela Davis's words, and then also for those who think like organizing is outside of them, that's maybe not something that they can do every single day or not think about, you really can, whether it's reading articles or being engaged within your community. I mean, the worst part is to be ignorant about what's happening around you, right? And like the conference itself invites community members to come in. And like last year, as I was just a part of the planning process, I wasn't a lead like how I am this year. I was having engaging, like super long conversations with people coming up to the activist activity that I hosted last year, which was about the gentrification of African American vernacular English. And a lot of people didn't know what AAVE was, or they don't know that the terms that they're using is actually belonging to a vernacular created by Black people, right? And that it shouldn't be misused. So this is just one example. And I had a lot of people come up to me, and we would have I had conversations that were lasting like 3 minutes to 15 to like half an hour, right? And just like one-on-one or having multiple groups coming in, and that they didn't know about certain things or certain topics about it, and like that it could be applicable to them to start changing some things. And that's why we have diverse topics, and what our participants and what our PAC leads are able to do is bring in topics that they're interested in, or we also invite, if you're not knowledgeable about something, choose that to work on a workshop for, right? Be engaged in that you don't have a lot of base knowledge for, because then you can come up from like the roots example of like, look, I had absolutely no idea what this was when I started, and then now after doing months of research, reaching out to multiple professors and speakers to come in about this topic, I'm confident enough to share this and invite people. It's a call in instead of a call out about knowledge. We want you to come in and be prepared to take in and not be afraid that you don't know something, because this is the opportunity for you here right now, being invited, community learning and engaging that way.
Wow, that is so articulate and inspiring. I don't know if you guys can see. I've got goosebumps. Because that really speaks to, I mean, that's why I do radio, is so I can educate myself about the world and my community and connect. And so thank you for that, Airielle. And so, Nicole, I want to pivot to you. When you think of the word practical activism, what does it mean to you?
I had to follow up with Airielle.
I love you.
Oh, gosh. Practical activism kind of also hits me in the same way as making activism seem more tangible for a lot of folks, because I know, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
The sound of a phone dropping in the studio. It's like a tree falling in the forest. That's okay.
But giving folks that tangibility to be like, this is actually, something that I can take part in and do, and understand that activism isn't necessarily just about like national problems. It can also stem from community problems and be practically anywhere. I know like for the past 2 years I've done, or this year and last year, I'll be doing 2 workshops that are hoping to bring in some communities that you don't necessarily expect social justice from. The first one being with the STEM community, which, from previous PAC years, we were like, we always have like a low STEM major turnout. Why don't we try to like curate a workshop that brings them into conversation about like what they can do in STEM to promote social justice. And this year I'm helping mentor a workshop about representation in gaming, which is another space which is where folks are like, social justice doesn't belong in games, and it's like it's literally embedded in games and how they're written and how they're produced. So yeah, giving people avenues to understand like activism can be anywhere and anything is what I think practical activism is about.
That's so juicy. And in case you've just tuned in and you're wondering what this is all about, this is KSQD at 90.7 FM. The show is Talk of the Bay. And tonight our program is about a potent and dynamic conference that happens annually at UCSC and is organized and presented by the students. It's called Practical Activism. It's their 20th anniversary. And here to talk about their vision for this year's conference are these very articulate and brilliant student program coordinators, Airielle Silva and Nicole Britton, along with Mark Gardner, who is the director of the Office of Academic and Co-curricular Programs. And so, you brought in perfectly talking about the workshops and the programs that are going to be happening. And already you've named like 3 things that I would very much be interested in hearing, and I bet our listeners would be really interested too. And so maybe we could talk about a little bit about the structure of the day-long event. And Mark, I see you nodding, so I'm going to just start with you, and we're going to go through the 3 of you. Tell us about how this event is structured and why it's structured that way.
Yeah. So the event starts, doors open at 10:30 on Saturday, February 25th. And it's going to start with tabling and what we're calling activism activities. And so tabling will be happening inside of the multipurpose room. That'll be campus and community organizations that will be representing, different places either on campus or in the community. And so let's see some that come to mind, like Surge will be there. Showing up for racial justice. Our campus African American Resource and Cultural Center will be there, and then a table from CISPES, which is an organization representing the people of El Salvador. And so folks will have an opportunity to interface with these organizations, right? Get connected, right? Get involved, as well as Airielle mentioned when they did a presentation about African American vernacular English, right? That's an example of an activism activity. So those will be outside, right? And so when folks show up between 10:30 and noon, there'll be an indoor tabling, fun stuff, food, and register. And then just outside the multipurpose room will be some activism activities, which will be like a lot more interactive tables that people can check out and get involved with. And then we'll have our keynote speaker around noon. I don't know if I should go through like a schedule of the day or if I should save some for the rest of them.
Well, we can save some for these lovely ladies, and then we're gonna talk about those keynote speakers because they're dynamite. So, Airielle, what would you like to say about the structure of the day? It's clearly dynamic and multifaceted.
It is. It allows for fluidity because in the morning you get to come in, enjoy some community, have some snacks, make some activist buttons because we really want to hark on being able to take something away from the movement. Recently, Angela Davis and the co-authors for Abolition Feminism Now just had a book tour that stopped by UC Santa Cruz. And in that novel, it talks about like the memorabilia you take away from these movements. And so we want to make sure it's really important that folks have something to take away from the Practical
I
Activism
noticed
Conference.
every year you guys have had a button making.
Yeah, we love
it. It's kind of great.
The Coco loves its buttons and it loves its stickers. So we want people to engage with that and make their own as well and how they see fit and how they see activism for themselves. And then our activist activities allow any of the student planners that wanted to pick a certain topic to talk about and or engage in with further research to have like a tabling session. So that allows people to come through for those first 2 hours of the conference to come look at some trifolds and come talk to people face to face about some topics and be there and engage. And then with our workshops, those are all led by teams. And so we have like 2 rounds of those. And so everyone has an opportunity to pick 2 workshops the day of the conference to attend of a multifaceted themes. And we, in every single one of our workshops, there is the practical element. So we like to engage with any community partners to have either like QR codes that you could scan to a petition, something that a newsletter you can sign up for right away, something practical in the space.
Right there
and then knowledge that you can take out of the room. Because that's really important for day of the conference. Like, we don't want you to just sit here with this knowledge and be like, wow, great, I just learned something amazing. And then after you leave, you don't take that knowledge anywhere. No, we want this knowledge to stay with you, to grow, and to invigorate something in you to keep learning and to be passionate, because that's what happens with a lot of us. We find that one thing we're really interested in, and then it takes off from there. And we want to invite that for not only students, community members, parents that are coming through to the college. Like, everyone is invited to engage.
Right? If everybody just found that one thing they're fired up about and then they gave their gifts and talents to it, this whole world would just change, right? So, Nicole, what else would you like to add about the structure of the day, if anything?
Because
they've covered a lot.
Yeah, they covered a lot, but I'd say the one thing that we haven't yet covered would be like the keynote speaker and the closing note speaker. So at the beginning and end of the conference, we always have these 2 oftentimes brilliant speakers that are usually there to help warm up the crowd to the day's activities or even close out the day's activities, usually with some sort of message of hope, either about helping aid the world in whatever way that they can through different issues. I know we have Alok as our keynote for this year, which is super exciting.
I can't believe it.
I cannot believe it.
Super exciting.
I do have a little clip. I don't want to cut you off, but since you're mentioning him, I'm going to just thank you for correcting me. I have a clip from them, and can I play it now?
Yes,
is that
go
okay?
for it.
And they introduce themselves beautifully. Okay.
I've learned that the most important questions don't have answers, they just have more questions in response. And one of the most fundamental questions that I've tried to run into in my life is, who am I? I began to realize I was not a boy. I think it took more time to figure out that just because I wasn't a boy meant I didn't have to be a girl. My name is Alok. I'm a writer and performance artist. I'm trying to challenge a world that isolates us from one another and prevents us from talking about the things that are most important to us in public. When I was a little kid, I lived life on my own terms. I utterly hated boys' clothes and the expectations that were assigned to me as someone supposed to being a boy. I was taught that so many parts of myself were incompatible, that I wasn't allowed to be free, and that was called masculinity. I try to flip the script in that question and say, when did my joy become too much for the society? When did my creativity have to be policed into the binary?
So that's a beautiful introduction to the opening keynote speaker who will set the tone for this conference. So I interrupted you when you were talking about Alok, but I thought let's just hear their voice. And please continue, Nicole.
Yeah, so we have Alok, who's going to be our opening speaker, globally talented, and it's going to be amazing. And then we have Melody Demore as our closing speaker, which we will be taking part in some interactive activities involving singing. Mm-hmm. So you will hear our beautiful voices singing at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, you got to shout it out for them. As Melanie made it really clear with us when we first started meeting with them, unfortunately, we don't have other lead and someone who also works in our office who, alongside Mark, leads the Coco. Erin, she's been super excited to get the crowd engaged, and Melanie's very intent on everybody on the feet. It is gather. It is choir time. You are singing with me. I'm singing at you. You're singing back, and just to engage and kind of shake it out at the end of the day after you just immersed yourself in so much knowledge, and then you get to shout out and come into community with each other. So that's going to be a really exciting way to close the conference.
It just sounds incredible. And Mark, you've got something to say.
Yeah, and I think the way that Melanie will close us out is also a good kind of circular kind of bring back to like practical activism, this idea that we all stand and we participate. Mm-hmm. We each have a role to play. We each have our voice to lend to, in this case, Melanie's performance, but we each have our voice to lend to a movement, to a cause. And by us each, standing up and participating with Melanie, it's that putting it in the body. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another piece of practical activism, right, is putting it in the body.
Yeah, the embodiment of the spirit of what we want to embody in the world. And, when I was reading about Melanie, it made me think also of the native tribes, the original peoples here on Turtle Island, and how they are continually standing up for the earth, for social justice, and they're really underdogs in this culture. How do they fuel themselves? And one of the ways they do that is they sing. They're ancient songs. And I was reading about this tribal chairwoman, Fawn Sharp. She's from a tribe in northwestern Washington, and she got into one of their, canoes with the tribe, and she was like, I was dying. I didn't have the strength to push through those waves. I'd never done it. And then we started singing our songs, and she said, and this thing came into me, and I could do it. And I'm always thinking, we need way more singing and music, like good singing and music, and Melanie's singing is good. I do have a piece to play from her, but we're going to get to that. And I want to just hop back to Alok, because I noticed over the years, as I was looking back in the archives, that you did have a lot of workshop topics on the issue of, gender fluidity and, sort of breaking open this conversation that is so rigid in our culture. And so he's such a brilliant way to open the conference. And I have another clip. It was really hard because I'm a prime example of the person that needs to go to this conference. They are so prolific in their wisdom and artistry. And they are talking about this question of gender binary, and it was just so perfect. I had to do another clip. Okay, here it comes.
We grew up in a world that divides billions of complex people into one of two categories. We'd never do that to colors. We'd never do that to flowers. We understand in most things that the more things that there are, the more beautiful they are. And not only do we divide them into two, we say that they have to be opposing and oppositional, which means to be a woman means not to be a man. To be masculine means to not be feminine. That means there's an internal war going on between us and inside of us, where we constantly have to ask, am I being too emotional? And does that make me less masculine? So we're having to regulate ourselves based off of these preconceived ideas that focus on conflict over creativity. In a world without beyond the gender binary, we would allow people to just express themselves without having to worry if it was man enough or woman enough. We'd allow people to be free.
Isn't that, well, I don't even have to say. It's just,
Ashe.
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 Yeah. So that's who you have opening the conference. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into more of the content of what all of your team is creating, because there's quite a few students involved. And so I'm excited to hear more, and we'll be back with more about the Practical Activism Conference happening up at UCSC this Saturday, February 25th. It's a day-long conference. I think it starts at 10:30, right?
10:30, doors open.
And it lasts till 5.
Till 5.
A lot of good stuff going on. You can expand your world at Practical Activism. All right, we'll be back right after this break.
Spend your Monday night at the Opera on KSQD Santa Cruz. You'll hear the world's greatest singers tell some of the world's most powerful, romantic, funny, and unforgettable stories, all set to the most glorious music ever composed. It's all about drama and being a diva. Monday night at the Opera, 7 to 10 p.m. on KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM.
Hi, I'm Bobby Bishop, host of Be in the Night, bringing you the best I can with jazz, love songs, and soul. Join me on Tuesday evenings from 7 to 10 p.m., playing the classics straight ahead and introducing you to the latest artists and composers. That's Tuesday nights from 7 to 10 p.m. right here on listener-supported KSQD 90.7 FM, Santa Cruz.
Welcome back to Talk of the Bay. Our topic is UCSC's Practical Activism Conference, which takes place annually. It's a day-long event featuring speakers, performance artists, interactive workshops, and a variety of hands-on creative activities on a wide range of social justice issues. The conference serves to provide information, tools, and opportunities to generate local and global change, and it's coordinated, planned, and implemented by a group of passionate students from College 9 and John R. Lewis College. And so, speaking of passionate students, we have two of them here in the studio, Nicole Britton and Airielle Silva, and but there's a lot more students involved. How many are involved, roughly? Do you know, Mark, or the two of you? There's a lot, right?
About 30 students in our class this quarter.
Okay.
Well, for the this class.
So does this count as a class?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So
you get credit.
This is how we also engage the community, as everyone that participates in planning PAC. Majority, we have some folks that aren't in the class who do either passive organizing or doing a lot of the work behind the scenes to make the day of happen. We offer a 2-credit course that happens in fall and winter quarter, and that's primarily the time that we're all organizing and meeting together. We're also doing journal entries every week about various topics. We have explored our speakers, we've explored how people think about activism for themselves, and also doing wellness check-ins, because a lot of the topics we may be covering can be really exhaustive if you're really embedding yourself into. So we want to make sure everyone's mind, body, spirit, and soul is doing okay throughout this process. And yeah, the class is one of the main ways that we can engage with each other and plan the day of.
Wow, that's sounds so valuable. I listen to effective civil rights leaders and activists, and when they're asked, how do you sustain what you do? What they say is, a community, this warm heart-to-heart connection, being seen, being held, being heard. So it's great to hear that you do these wellness checks. Nicole, what can you tell us about the other students involved?
Well, I have to say that I am super happy and excited about this year in particular, because this is actually the first time that we've had a class this large in quite a while. The pandemic had us taking a really big hit, mostly because I understand not wanting to have more Zoom meetings on your plate than you'd really want to. So for the past 2 years, we've had a little bit kind of a half planning team with usually about 20 students, whereas this year's 30. And I know that we're hoping to achieve pre-pandemic levels again, because I think before the pandemic we would have up to 50 students helping out with the conference, which the more the merrier.
Right. Absolutely, the more the merrier. And what are some of the examples of what being involved in this conference teaches you, gives you, and enables you to take out into the world? You've already named a lot of it, but I'm sure there's more, right? Being the leaders of this really builds skills.
Definitely. I think, well, for myself and also transitioning from just being someone of a planner and also a lead of the conference, you definitely get a lot of organizational skills under wraps because we're in charge of doing meetings outside of class. Not everything that happens in the class isn't, that hour and a half that we have is not enough for us to be able to plan day of. And we're only meeting like once a week in that class. So it's really up to our student planners and leads to be able to organize times to meet outside of class. You're also doing a lot of outreaching work. And so if you're not used to contacting many groups of people, individuals, trying to engage them into the conference and just learn more and research, you gain these skills here. We teach everyone, and we also have like tabling, so everyone in the class also tables around campus to try to engage folks into this. And right, that might be something new for some folks, you know, or you might not know how to engage communities like that, right? And so this is a really good gateway of like being able to be organized, both in a sense of like you get to learn, you're gonna love your Google Calendar. You're gonna love your Google Calendar. You're gonna write a lot of emails and then also make that practical like in the class to be able to envision like what is my presentation going to look like? How do you want to bring in the community? Because there's so many ways to start your workshop, right? You could have it more of like TED Talk style where you have your speakers coming up and presenting something, or you can have a roundtable discussion, multiple panel speakers, but your audience is answering questions and you're doing this back and forth feedback, right? And so it allows people to really explore themselves and just be really adaptable and versatile because you get to pick up what you want to. And that's something we ask too, like, what do you want to learn in this space? How can we help you engage in what you're interested in and then help you through that process?
Mark, I know you have something to say. I can tell. Just I can see it. Go for it.
It's actually only 2 words, practical pedagogy. And to think about like, you know, what the work that goes into planning the practical activism class, because one of those meetings that Airielle talked about outside of class, if you're a lead, is meeting with myself and Aaron and our other professional staff members to plan the class and to plan the lessons every week. And so that's one of those outside of class meetings. You know, but you know, the reason I said practical pedagogy is because it really is this idea of like, yes, it's your research around your topic, it's articles, it's readings, but then it's also again those wellness checks. It's also those skills of talking to people, right? And just, you know, catching someone on the fly and saying, hey, have you heard of this conference? How can I make you interested in it? And then it's also learning the lesson that, you know, these things don't happen on our own, right? That we're not alone. And that's part of our presence as professional staff, as staff mentors, is also to model this idea that movements don't happen by themselves. Like no one goes at this alone. And when you go out into the world, look for those people, right? Look for your people, right? That are going to have your back and let you know when you're in over your head, or push you and cheerlead you on when it's time to go. And so it takes a practical pedagogy, right, to make a practical activism conference happen.
I love those 2 words. And I you know, one of the biggest studies show that one of the biggest fears that people have is actually standing in front of others and speaking. And so having the opportunity to like ground yourself, find the message that matters to you. And I mean, one that really matters to you. So often in school, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but so often in school, we end up having to like make a speech about something that's an assignment and it's kind of going through the motions.
Yep.
Okay, Mark,
you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
yeah,
I remember those days.
Right. And I'm like, what does that really give you? Whereas putting yourself on the line, like saying like, this is what I believe and I want to push against this really powerful system, right? That's just constantly applying this pressure and saying no to these changes that we want to create. Being able to kind of pierce that with your voice and be kind of vulnerable and exposed is a huge growing tool, right?
Yep, the vulnerability. You hit the nail right on the. It's that vulnerability, I'm just, you know, not to be cheesy for a second, but like cheesy. I will. And I'm so proud of the students, right? Because, you know, oftentimes we're asking students in so many contexts, right, outside of practical activism, to be vulnerable and open up. And I look at my staff peers, right, and I'm like, do we open up as much as we expect our students to open up to us? And so it's like, we need to model this, right? And so that's what makes me passionate as a mentor, as a staff mentor for practical activism. It's like, we can't expect students, even though it's great that it's a student-led conference, right, that's the idea, but we can't expect students to constantly be the ones, standing up to the systems that are applying pressure and making themselves vulnerable if we as staff mentors aren't willing to make ourselves vulnerable as well. And so, yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that vulnerability, and it's tough.
Do you have anything to say to that, Airielle? Or are you just like, yeah, no, I don't have to be vulnerable to do this? Like,
No, definitely am vulnerable. And we try to create that space in the class and just with one another, because oftentimes you're getting into relationships, like friendships that you're going to have for long periods of time, or at least within your college career, that you know that these are people that you can trust, that you align yourself with, and that are going through this process of, it's a space to heal, right? And it's also a space to communicate that healing and being able to stay engaged. And I think for us as well, because this is a student-led conference, this is a great opportunity for us to also fight back at the institution in which we occupy in, right? And so, if UC Santa Cruz was living by all the standards of like our student speakers and our student activists, right, it'd look a lot differently, right? Because there's a lot of unseen labor, there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into doing this work. And if we're talking about issues and bringing awareness to it, right, that means that there's something wrong. There's a root problem. We want to address it. How can we do it? And that's why our students are so engaged about it. And so it's kind of going back into that idea of like the call in of also, we want you, the university, to pay attention to these issues that we're raising. And this is just one of the many platforms throughout student organizing on our campus that is a space to do that, right? And because we hark on, this is student-led. Why is that? Why? Right? And like this 20 years of this, And so that's it, Nicole. I see it in your eyes. What do you want to add?
I can see her, and I'm like, I know you've got something to say, so go for it.
I was also going to say, I really appreciate how practical activism as well also just allows students to enter into the space and have the discussions that we have about all these issues, because besides just doing the whole speech class thing where you're just like, you have to talk about this topic for like 10 minutes and you're graded, I also sometimes find that sometimes classes don't have a good way of just being able to see the student with where they're at, because there always seems, for me at least, a divide between like the academic world versus the real world, and how those two worlds are kind of always like polarized into being like, academics, we don't really like to talk about the real world issues that may be affecting your students. We're just going to like try to push past them while giving you assignments, which sometimes works, and other times I'm just like, we kind of really should talk about what's been going on in the nation this week, because there has been a lot. And I'm just really happy that practical activism is a platform that we could use to talk about those, because it gives everyone kind of the means to be like, okay, we can actually have a sit down and chat about issues instead of like pushing them to the side as something to be taken care of later, like post-graduation, for example.
Yeah, I think you're really speaking to what Airielle brought up, which is the healing process that's embedded in, this is sort of a transformational space, and you're not only seeking to transform what's out there, y'all are transforming while you're putting it on. And I'm like, this is just my personal fantasy, but I'm like, wow, if all companies thought of themselves that way, because they're full of human beings that come in with incredible pain and suffering, challenges and difficulties, and then they come in the space and they're like, be professional. And I find that partly understandable, but I'm like, there's a way that we could do this that's more human. And so I want to talk about that more. But before we do, if you've just tuned in, you are listening to KSQD on 90.7 FM, live streaming at ksqd.org. This is Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington, and our show tonight is about this amazing conference that's happening up at UCSC campus, put on by students from the John R. Lewis College and College 9. And it's their 20th anniversary doing the Practical Activism Conference. And so we have student leaders here and the director of the Office of Academic and Co-curricular Programs, Mark Gardner, who you get to oversee this amazing process, right?
So lucky.
Right?
Yes.
I know.
I wake up and get to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking a bit about, this as a healing space. And I actually think that, in the community, let's just take myself as an example and how I was like messing up the pronouns for a look, right? And you're talking about calling in, right? And a lot of people have a lot of fear, like, oh, I'm in this group and there's all these groups and I might not have a place and I might not be able to do it right. So they pull back and they avoid, right? And this invitation to be like, no, come on in, make mistakes, respectful mistakes, and we'll help you, right? We'll call you in and we'll give you knowledge, skills, understanding, and you'll go back out in the community more integrated and knowledgeable, right? So could you speak a little bit more about doing this as a healing space? Because let me be just honest. So my training is in psychology and I've worked as a therapist. And so I'm really, really interested in how we heal together through what we do. So
I think for most of the student organizers, I think what's important is like most of us are BIPOC and queer students that are leading this conference. And particularly this year, all of us really brown, really gay. And so that's, and that's...
Airielle, what does BIPOC stand for?
Let's do vocab. So for folks that don't know, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Often you may be hearing the word POC, or there's a difference between saying BIPOC and POC. Black and Indigenous in front of the POC term is to be a more helpful identifier of those who either have suffered more through white supremacy, racism, right? And really highlighting those groups, so Black and Indigenous people, though it can be a general term to encompass those who are being minoritized by society, and it's kind of a term that we're able to use to highlight multiple issues at once and really like highlight intersectionality. Though if you're talking about an issue for a particular ethnic group or group just in general, you want to make sure it's important and name those peoples and highlight why they're struggling. And so I say that because we're really intentional, and the students this year, the planners, and all the staff that's been a part of the conference are intentional about picking the topics we want to do and why. Because we want to be really thorough with our research and making sure what do we want to learn, what do we want the community to learn and take away from the space. Because we invite you to take in any interpretation in the space. We want to make sure it's done respectfully and done thoughtfully and carefully.
And to that end, bringing in this idea of community agreements. And so if you've been in, social justice spaces, dialogue spaces, storytelling spaces, you may be familiar with the idea of community agreements. And that's this idea that, we're going to list out, right, some agreements, right, that we're going to uphold in the space in terms of how we want to be in the space and have dialogue in this space. And so part of what we're going to do this year is have some community agreements that we're going to display when we're doing the opening, and then we're going to have them posted in our different workshop rooms. And that's part of that call-in, right? That's part of that call-in that, it's, yes, make mistakes, right? Respectfully make mistakes, take responsibility for those mistakes, right? That it's okay. And then, once you know better, do better, right? So, I think part of what makes that space, then that healing space and that call-in space is having that, that layer of community agreements, right? That we're not just going to throw ourselves into this and hope for the best, but that we're going to, have these guidelines, and that really these guidelines are not for me to police other people. It's not for me to be like, oh, I don't think you're being respectful. It's for me to keep myself in check, right? And that's the one thing that we really try to emphasize about community agreements is that these aren't policing rules. These are self-guiding, self-governance kind of rules.
Right. And if we don't know context, like a community is so splintered, right? No, for millennia upon millennia, human tribes had their agreements, and individuals got taught from birth on, like, this is how we do life. Now we're bumping into all kinds of groups, and if a workshop doesn't have clear agreements, I never feel safe, and I never want to stay. But having strong agreements is sort of like living a values-based life. You know your values, you know your agreements, then you know, like, okay, I can pour myself into this. So speaking of how carefully you have chosen the workshop topics, could we name some of them so our community, our listeners, can know what you've chosen to uplift?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I can kind of go through, I have the list up right in front of me of some of the workshops. So I'll go through some of the titles, and then Nicole and myself can talk about the individual ones that we are involved in and planning and mentoring this year. So for our block 1, we have embodied leadership, showing up with Aki presence. We have a workshop about a restorative dialogue, assessing hate bias response in housing and residential life. A workshop that I am a part of planning is called Disability Justice in Academia and Beyond. We have Nicole's, which is representations in game media. We have Protecting Indigeneity, the Preservation of Culture. And then in our block 2, we have Generation Justice, Activism as a Practice. Sexploring Your Resources, Let's Learn About Sex Ed. We have a workshop about environmental justice. Then Feeling Mixed, which is all about exploring mixed racial and gender and sexuality identities. And then we have a workshop about U.S. incarceration and imagining abolition.
Wow, juicy. So let's talk about a few of them, because, I mean, these are, I noticed the ones that I got, super hopped up about. Like the one, I think, Airielle, that you are going to be leading, which is assessing hate and bias response in housing and residential life. Is that correct?
I'm actually a part of the disability justice.
The disability, sorry. Okay, that one also is interesting. I'm like choosing my workshop curriculum. Let's talk, can you spend a couple of minutes just talking about why you chose that and what's going to be involved in that workshop?
Definitely. So all of our workshops actually spawned through what our planners were interested in. So everyone had the opportunity to prompt a workshop idea, whether it was thorough paragraphs of what you want to explore or a simple sentence of something about social justice that you wanted to talk about or learn about. And so a couple of us got into disability justice, and it's going to be overall a panel inviting UC Santa Cruz expert professors, Valashni Kupan, who's going to be doing a section about adaptive fashion, the origin of adaptive fashion, why it's important in disability justice. We have
Can you give me one example of adaptive fashion, so if somebody's wondering what that means?
Yeah, so adaptive fashion is clothing that is made accessible to those who have differently abled bodies. So clothing's going to be looking different if you have a limb missing, right? Or if you are not born in what we would title as like able-bodied. And so if you need fashion, if you need clothing that's accessible for you in any of the accessible devices that you have, so whether that's a wheelchair, whether that is crutches, etc., right? And that these are made by disabled fashion makers, and then also what the larger society doesn't know, like what this also prompts for people coming into the workshop. Did you ever think about people that aren't able-bodied would have different fashion needs and accessibility needs, right? And also engages that conversation. Then we also have Laura Harrison, Megan Moody, and Amy Vidali, who are going to be exploring disability and methods of applying disability justice in various contexts that aren't often discussed. And so these are all professors that work at UC Santa Cruz that we invited to speak at our workshop. And I also plan this alongside Kylie, Sewell, and Turin. So I want to shout them out because they're the lovely students that I've been able to mentor and lead throughout this workshop. And it's been really exciting for us we did a lot of research right before and like throughout these months, making sure we're reading up on terms and providing that. And like day of, we're making a pamphlet for folks to take home of what are some terms you need to know, know a little bit about what they learned day of, and then some knowledge to take beyond them to so that they can inquire about disability justice and how they can get involved.
Very cool. Thank you. My mind's already thinking. I've got synapses firing. And so, Nicole, I want to pivot to you and the workshop that you, I assume, has taken the lead in organizing, but doing it in conjunction with others, which is representation in game media.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I'm leading this workshop with my fabulous co-planners, Alan and Alicia. And we will be bringing in 3 folks to kind of make an interactive tier list creation of various games, and if their representation is good and should be something that more companies should strive to be doing, or if the representation's okay, it's there at surface value, but they really need to put in the work to do better. So we've invited the Brandy Rose, Sailor Scout Austin, and the Kappa Chris as our 3 panelists, who will be helping us kind of discuss the ins and outs of what it is to design games with accurate and healthy representation, as well as just have a larger community discussion of what representation looks like in games and why it should be cherished and valued, considering that there has been a lot of talk in the past couple of months from various games companies about publishing and the ins and outs of why people of color, the BIPOC community, and the transgender community and other minority groups, how come they're not featured as often in games.
Oh, so there has been recent prominent discussion about that?
Yes.
A lot, yes.
And it all involves she who must not be named, unfortunately.
Okay. I don't know who that is, and we won't name them.
No.
No, we will not name them.
Okay. Excellent. So, Mark, any commentary on any of the workshops being presented? Any particular ones you're looking forward to trying out?
Let's see. Well, the workshop that I'm mentoring is Generation Justice. Okay. And we're actually kind of doing a part 1, part 2. So the showing up with key presence, that's in workshop block 1, that's being led by Professor Silva Osterlich. She's talking about kind of, the body, activism in the body, and a lot of, personal reflection work, right? That's a part of that healing space, right? But then Generation Justice, we're going to kind of come in and take this superhero motif that gets at this idea of the self-reflection that it then takes to get to community action. And so we're going to do this idea of reflecting on our powers, right? What are our superpowers? And even doing a profile, right? What are our powers? What's our nemesis? What's our kryptonite? What's our origin story, right? And then we're going to get folks into groups, and we're going to make a zine, right? Our own little graphic novel, where, okay, come together in a group, right? Talk about your individual powers, pick a cause, pick a mission, and talk about how then you would actually put your powers together to then tackle this mission. And then even beyond that, it's think about maybe some tables you stopped by today. Think about some activism activities that you maybe stopped by today. How could you actually apply this, this group collective effort to tackle some issues, right? And so, that'll be our workshop that we're leading with Generation Justice, which is a part of Intersectionality Laboratory, which is a group that's helping to put on the conference that I co-founded. Shameless plug. I worked that in there. Shameless plug for Intersectionality Laboratory. And the way that we're taking on that superhero motif is an example of how we would talk about these kinds of things in Intersectionality Laboratory.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so fun and playful. And using gamification principles is a really powerful way to help people find a completely different approach. And it just generates a sort of can-do energy. I'm a superhero.
That's the idea.
Identify the bad guys and make a plan for how you're taking them on. So that's very cool. I love it. And I studied Aikido, so I love seeing that Aiki presence one. And so let's imagine, okay, so we've gone through the conference, we've attended this amazing workshop on, gaming and better representation in gaming. We've looked at disability justice. We've created our superheroes. And now it's the end of the day. And we all get to come together and experience the closing keynote speaker. Give me a couple of sentences on the wonderful Melanie
Demore.
Melanie Demore. So I want to play a song from her, and it's called I'm Sending You Light. And it really feels like this. Okay.
All right.
I'm sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. No matter where you go, no matter where you've been, you'll never walk alone. I feel you deep within. I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love.
Talk about healing.
Ashe.
So,
Ashe.
yeah, what a beautiful way to close the day. And so as we bring this interview to a close, I'd love for you to share with our listeners once again how can they register, when it's happening, what time it's starting, and
Yes. Again, February 25th, 10:30 a.m., doors open. You can register. Oh, I don't have the
I think
link.
I have it here
the
at
link. Yes.
practicalactivism.ucsc.edu.
There you go. That's where you can go and register.
Great.
And registration is not required, though we want folks to let us know that they're coming through to the conference. And we have registration tables at the front of the multipurpose room, which is located in College 9 and John R. Lewis. And you can register there, figure out what workshops you want to attend day of. And so don't feel pressured to register online, though we'd really appreciate if you do.
Ooh, can you say anything about parking? I bet you somebody's listening. They're like, oh, the parking up there.
Yeah, so the parking lots up at in our colleges are 164, 165, 114. And just in case there's overflow, because I know there's also going to be a family day happening as well as an alumni for pack planners afterwards. So there's going to be a lot happening. So the Core West parking structure is a good place to know, as well as Crown Merrill College, their parking lots. I don't know their parking lot numbers, but the Crown Merrill College, which is right next door to us, also has some parking as well. So the College 9 John R. Lewis lots, Core West, and then Crown Merrill is the next closest sister college pair.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Airielle, Nicole, Mark, for coming in and sharing all this great information. It's been a really inspiring show and a pleasure having you. I'm Christine Barrington. This is Talk of the Bay, and you've been listening to KSQD Santa Cruz. And coming up next is First Person Singular, to be followed by Peace Talks.